Yes, yes. Welcome to the ancient world of tabletop games. I am Agamemnon from the historical documentary Time Bandits. This is a report from a fugitive. The winds are blowing a little more coldly around Griffin Mountain this January, with the passing of game designer and artist Jennell Jaquays. This is the anniversary month of the 50th anniversary of the publication of Dungeons & Dragons. In January 1974, the books were printed and ready for business. According to Gygax, the first sale was done by month's end. It took until 1975 for the game to fly off the shelves faster than a dragon, though that's another story. But first, Coca-Cola. You may be shocked to discover Coca-Cola appeared in a wildly different form in its early years. I'm not talking about the cocaine. Well, there is that. The drink was marketed as medicine. It had to be made up for you. One of the big myths about Coca-Cola is the great advice supposedly passed to the company in a two-word phrase: bottle it. We think of Coca-Cola in very distinctive bottles with its logo and secret formula and festive adverts. A lot of marketing baggage for a long-lived product. Speaking of which, once upon a time, over the hills and far away in a land with a grand king, wise advisor, bountiful gardens and awesome sights, there was a company called TSR, the Dungeons & Dragons Company. If you burned their books on a bonfire, you could legitimately hear the screaming souls of entrapped demons returning to hell. And that is a role-playing fact. Now, the game wizards at TSR believed they'd make their money from selling the rulebooks. The rulebooks serve as guides to running adventures, but the game wizards weren't all that interested in creating adventures as products. Surely the players will write their own adventures. Who would buy adventure books? Gamers. Short and obvious answer. Hey, Gygax, bottle it. Enter a company called Judges Guild. We'll write adventure modules, and they cut a deal with TSR. Wait. People are buying these modules? There's money in them? Of course there's money in them. Adventure book products, scenarios, modules put out by a publisher serve a fantastic purpose. I don't have to spend time writing the adventure, and I certainly won't have to toil for a month of Sundays to draw two shaky maps and come up with a timeline and all the blocks of statistics I'll need to conjure from nothingness. The module, whether very modular or not, is a time saver. You'll still take that scenario and do your own thing, maybe even use it for another game. I ran a Call of Cthulhu adventure as a Buffy the Vampire Slayer scenario at short notice. By that I mean I was still scrambling to have everything ready 10 minutes before my international players showed up in the electronic gaming space. No, it isn't a virtual tabletop, it's a real table. Do I have everything? Double check. This is going to be a nightmare. Now I have 9 minutes. My players declared the inspired insanity of that night one of the top adventures they played. It was a one-night adventure that lasted 2 nights, but that's practically the law in gaming. Who could forget Ooptifloop, the exchange of inappropriate text messages, or the raging gunfight against zombies that also included the mighty clash of axes in dim-lit sewers? Ah, yes. The Cthulhu Dungeon. Published adventures save time. Someone drew a picture of the monster. A time saver. D&D gained greatly from publishing adventure books in the end. Jennell wrote them and was sometimes that artist who drew a picture of the monster as well. Cover art to boot. Periodically I pick up arcane items from the hobby's earlier days. Just recently I tried the print-on-demand service from DriveThruRPG. Jennell had the assignment of linking 4 separate D&D adventures under the one roof. Now that I have Shadowdark on my table, I'm considering running older Dungeons & Dragons modules in black and white. We'll see. Kelsey Dion, chief Shadowdark scribe, took a lot of inspiration from Jennell. Loads of designers did too. Jaquaysing the dungeon is a phrase applied to making an adventure more freeform, less linear. You mean we can sneak around the side of this wicked temple and fight the massive boss monster straight away? Yes. You can. Are you sure you want to do that? Jennell's work for Judges Guild led to jobs for TSR and other companies besides. Many role-playing game designers have one foot in the camp of computer game creation. Whether on paper or on your computer screen, Jennell's design influence was and remains widespread. The best dungeons moved away from a linear level of play into a mosaically oriented style of adventure. This would include linking in 3 dimensions, adding a great element of verticality to play. But non-linearity and vertical play shine with the addition of memorable characters. Characters raise the stakes, increase interaction, and certainly concerning villains, make the adventures themselves worth retelling as role-playing war stories, down the years. You could tackle a nuclear bunker of a dungeon with one vault door leading in and, if you're lucky, a far-off exit as well. Hell, you will have fun with it. Alternatively, there you are at the top of the well of eternal screams, so deep that you'll yell for all time if you fall in, never reaching the bottom, your mummified skeleton's ribcage whistling and wailing in the hellish air currents. This is a well wide enough to swallow a galleon whole, with cave mouths and galleries and balconies disappearing into the depths. If you decide descent is the only way in, are you missing something back in the nearby village? Descent on which side, though? The north face? These galleries are staggered. You're skipping the balcony in favour of a gloomy cave entrance. The western waterfall? Scramble down beside and around, and there could be a hidden cave entrance waiting for you behind the mighty torrent. But what's waiting for you in that hidden cave entrance? Vertical dungeon, multiple choices, not all of those great, characters you won't forget. That's where the adventure lies. Hope you packed stout rope. This freedom to roam across a dungeon is what Jennell nailed to the mainmast of the hobby, though a little more elaborately than I've described here. I've played in and run straight-line adventures, but I prefer the mosaic to the line, no matter which side of the Dungeon Master's screen I happen to land on. If you've ever gone through a dungeon in a long, looping curve of your own making, only to return to your starting point, then remember two things. That ability was shaped by Jennell's effect on game design, and whoever wrote the dungeon made an offering to the dice gods, giving you the scope to truly explore haunted ruins the way they should be explored, waywardly. I'm not recommending that a party of adventurers instantly scatter inside a large cavern containing many points of interest in several ways leading out. Just don't. But it was funny when it happened. There are adventure books murmuring out in the dark that are considered classics. It's the nature of gaming, though, that products are tied to a particular edition of a game system. And so you might miss out on a classic unless you're willing to do a certain level of conversion work. Obtaining a legendary adventure may be as simple as stumbling very easily over a digital file. If you're lucky, someone else has already posted converted statistics online to take you from there to here and beyond. True classics come back. May be available through print on demand or released digitally. Occasionally, they're dusted down and reprinted outright. Here's an example by Goodman Games. The Temple of Elemental Evil. This package offered essays on the dungeon, gave you the original dungeon printing, and threw in a conversion to 5th edition D&D. And it is gone. Business arrangements between game companies don't last forever. You might find the set on sale here, there, with ever-increasing price hikes as time passes. That's a lot of additional material. There's Egg of the Phoenix. Quite the comparison, and that's 4 dungeons mashed together in the Phoenix reprint. I'd wondered about a legendary, nay, mythical D&D adventure, not produced by the official company, but published by Judges Guild. Dark Tower is a dungeon from out of the past. I imagined what it would be like to play in the adventure. It is one of Jennell's most famous creations, alongside the Caverns of Thracia. Soon I'll have a hefty copy of Dark Tower on this table, courtesy Goodman Games. I barely typed that and received an update from the Dark Tower Kickstarter page. Goodman Games remembers Jennell in the update and posts a few pictures of what we can expect on our doorsteps shortly. That Kickstarter now feels like a monument to Jennell. In the earlier stages of the production, the company asked backers to vote in polls to determine the nature of play. What powers and abilities should this monster have? I was moderating a Twitch stream running a role-playing game night at the time, so I polled the RPG community on that stream, and we fed our results into the gaping maw of the knowledge devourer at Goodman Games headquarters. Often the hobby feels corporate and uninvolved. Jennell's own views on corporate bullshit are pretty much as you'd expect. At the other end of the scale, away from the business suits, the void, seated at our own tables, we look to some form of community spirit to keep the hobby going. I've often considered the gaming hobby to resemble a vast plain upon which you will spy many campfires. Somewhere out in the dark, there's a campfire for you, and if there isn't one, find a space, set down your kindling, and build a fire. Others will appear in the night, with dice and a gleam for adventure in the eye. No matter how corporate or uninvolved the business of the hobby becomes, we still roll on regardless, knowing that's what we have access to. Many campfires. Skewering the corporate side of the hobby came with experience. Jennell was briefly in a managerial role as director of graphics at TSR around the time the company was piloted into the ground by the Queen of the Demon Web Pits, whose true demonic name is written in the speech of Mordor, which I will not utter here. Funny that 2 women with the same surname were in charge of D&D dumpster fires. Coincidence? Random encounter? That table was rigged. Getting away from the corporate world, in her own words, Jennell believed tabletop roleplay game play sessions are at their very core social events. They're about people getting together in real time and sharing the experience of gaming together as well. I would add to that in real time across time zones. Jennell also highlights a core feature of gaming. Often only the person running the game knows the rules. She stated, playing D&D does not require more than one person having a single set of rules. And even then, it need not be the most current set of rules. There's a lot to be said for physical media. Presumably, if your machine fails or the power goes, you could carry on with a physical copy of the rules and emergency lighting. Or an emergency copy of the rules seared into the brain of the dungeon master. How deep was Jennell's involvement in the hobby? This quote sums up. I can play Dungeons & Dragons or Tunnels & Trolls with the rulebooks I acquired in 1975 if I choose. That's how far back. Jennell was one of those people who discovered this strange new game as the dragons started to fly. In this brief obituary, I'd rather celebrate a life in gaming design than dwell at length on the poisonous decline of this or that radioactive company. However, it is worth noting that Judges Guild faded as an innovative company long ago, quite early in its history in fact. In its more recent zombie-revived form, it was run under a cloud of racism, anti-Semitism, bigotry, homophobia and transphobia. For Jennell, a transgender game designer, to see Dark Tower and other properties held by Judges Guild just sitting there out of reach, under the thumb of a bigot, must have been awful. Judges Guild had cash flow problems, so Goodman Games stepped in and bought the copyright to Dark Tower. And here we are now with a blast from the past updated for 5th edition. I don't care where corporate D&D is headed next. Around many campfires, loads of us have gathered third-party material for play using 5th edition. Much of that material has subtle and not so subtle influences garnered from Jennell's pioneering work throughout the hobby's half-century history. The people around the many campfires on the vast plain have what the industry suits lack: passion for the hobby. Creators like Jennell lit the spark of that interest way at the start, and though the hobby faces far too many storms, the campfire flames carry that spark still. I couldn't create a comprehensive list of Jennell's achievements. The internet is packed with that information. I thought it better to do a brief character sketch, something the artist was familiar with naturally. So I'll end where the video opened, with something Jennell worked on as a major contributor. Beyond the Pass never materialized. It wasn't for Dungeons & Dragons, but RuneQuest. In the early days of gaming, all sorts of people had a look at D&D, went away, decoded the rules, had a think about it, and felt they could come up with alternatives. RuneQuest was an early example of a hobby setting down roots and declaring, we are here to stay. Beyond the Pass became Griffin Mountain for RuneQuest. Later that classic returned as Griffin Island. The island version was part of a business deal between companies and gave you the adventuring without the specific detail of the world setting which was stripped away. I've run this twice. Well, once. Once I ran it twice. The idea is that you arrive on a mysterious island. There's a map to stare at with notes upon it. I mean, come on, seriously. Here's Griffin Mountain on the map, and no one has ever returned from there. The players are obviously going to be the first to achieve this mighty feat. What works in games? The mosaic approach. Here's a whole island to explore. Cryptic maps are good. They work. Put stuff in front of players and watch them go. Unfortunately, the first time I ran this, the players decided they would cover the entire island in a combat round. I am not joking. We go here, there. How long will it take to head to all the points everywhere? As soon as their beginning characters heard there was a sorcerer on the island, they decided he had to die. It was like watching a game of D&D with first-level characters declaring their first catch of the day would be Sauron. If he has hit points, we can kill him and steal his stuff. Precious metal, I heard. That campaign play lasted one night, and it was quietly shelved. One player wanted to run through it again from scratch with different players. Definitely not those players, after not having truly played it at all. That effort didn't count. A careless player stepped on a fallen metal miniature that had to be warped back into shape. It was that kind of night. When I ran Griffin Island the second time, different players were more cautious. They created their own adventures, just a reminder from earlier. Adventure book products, scenarios, modules put out by a publisher serve a fantastic purpose. I don't have to spend time writing the adventure, and I certainly won't have to toil for a month of Sundays to draw 2 shaky maps and come up with a timeline and all the blocks of statistics I'll need to conjure from nothingness. And yet, Looking through the box, I found a hastily scrawled map with a few game mechanics attached to it, representing scenes I'd borrowed from another gaming supplement. I have the scenario book here. The second batch of players didn't cross the island in a combat round. I added enough flair of my own to flesh out an already busy place, and the map I drew, it had multiple paths to it, one of them secret, and there was a vertical element to the dramatic action that unfolded. I can't say I stole those elements from Jennell. They were given to the hobby, with Griffin Mountain in the background, on a vast plain of many campfires.